Okay, in this video, we're just going to do a very quick overview of graphing the slope-intercept form, which is commonly written as y equals mx plus b. Now, the m stands for slope. The b is the y-intercept. And the procedure is pretty straightforward. We're going to plot a point at the y-intercept. So in other words, we're going to look at the b here. We're going to plot a point at the y-intercept. We're then going to count increments of the slope and then plot more points. So now we should have several dots, and then we're going to connect those dots with a line. So first off, let's talk about, in terms of slope-intercept, let's talk about what the y-intercept is. So again, the y-intercept is used, we use the letter b for the y-intercept, and it basically is just where the line of the graph crosses the y-axis, and technically it is the point 0, comma b. The x value is 0 and the y value is b, whether it's up or down on the y-axis. So let's do a couple examples. So b equals 3. So we simply look at the y-axis. We completely ignore the x-axis, and we just count 1, 2, 3. So b equals 3 is that point right there. B equals -1. So we go down 1. So this is the point b equals -1. B equals 5. Again, we start at the origin. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That dot right there is b equals 5. And then lastly, b equals 0. Now this isn't a trick question. We simply go up 0 spaces. We start at the origin and we do not count up at all. B equals 0 is literally the origin. Okay? Right there. So now I'd like you guys to try some. And what I'd like you to do is just cross some lines on a piece of graph paper and try to graph b equals -2, b equals 4, and b equals 0. Again, the y-intercepts of all these. You can pause the video now and then try it on your own. We'll go over the answers in a few seconds. Okay, b equals -2. We start at the origin and we count down 2 spaces. So b equals -2 is right there. B equals 4. We start at the origin. 1, 2, 3, 4. So b equals 4 is right there. And then lastly, b equals 0. Again, that is the origin. B equals 0 is the origin. We do not count up at all. All right, so that's the y-intercept. Again, what's the y-intercept? It's where the line or graph crosses the y-axis using the letter b. So now we'll talk about the slope. Again, the concept that we're talking about is the slope-intercept form. So we just talked about intercept, y-intercept. Now the slope, we use the letter m, and it basically means rise over run. Now I write run right just to make sure that people don't think, oh, I can go left or right. No, it's run to the right. In the Western world, we read left to right. So it's rise over run, or run to the right. I discourage students from saying over, go over 3 spaces because, well, which direction are we going over, right? So run to the right, rise over run, or rise over run right is a good way of memorizing it. So for this set of examples, all you need is a dot on a piece of graph paper. All right, I'll switch colors here. So what's a slope of 1/3? Well, it's a rise of 1. I'm rising 1, and then I'm going to run to the right, 1, 2, 3. So I'm going to have a line that's going like that. This line has a slope of 1/3. How about a slope of -2/5? Well, if I start here and I guess just put a dot anywhere on a piece of graph paper, my rise is -2, so I'm going down 2. I'm going down 2, but then I'm going to run to the right 5 spaces. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So my line is going to go in a downwards direction like that. Now, what if your slope is written like this one, m equals 2, or the slope is 2? Well, that doesn't look like a fraction. How can you make sense of rise over run with that? Well, just make it a fraction. So what is the equivalent fraction to 2? The equivalent fraction is 2 over 1. Now that's a fraction. I can have rise over run. Rise 2, that means go up 2, right? And then I'm going to run 1 space to the right. All right. Now I'd like you guys to try a couple. Pause the video and then try a slope of 3/4, a slope of -3, and a slope of 1/5. And again, just take a sheet of graph paper, just put a dot anywhere on a sheet of graph paper. We'll go over the answers in a few seconds. Okay, a slope of 3/4 is rise 3, 1, 2, 3, run 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So a slope of 3/4 looks like that. A slope of -3, again, it doesn't look like a fraction. We can make it a fraction. -3/1, that means we are rising -3. We're going down 3 spaces. 1, 2, 3, and then we're going to run 1 to the right. All right, so a slope of -1/3 looks kind of like that. And then lastly, a slope of 1/5, rise 1, and then run 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So a slope of 1/5 will look kind of like that. So again, getting back to our original concept of graphing our slope-intercept, we're going to plot a point at the y-intercept. We're going to count increments of the slope and plot more points, and we're going to connect them with a line. What's the slope? It's rise over run. What's the y-intercept? It's where the line or graph crosses the y-axis. So let's do some examples, and let's do them quickly. And I've recopied our procedure in sort of a shorthand way. The very first thing you're going to do, and this is really important, you get this procedure down. You're going to plot a point at the y-intercept. Then you're going to count increments of the slope. And notice I'm saying increments. I strongly recommend you count multiple dots so you can draw a line through multiple dots. And then you're going to connect with the line. So our first example, we're going to graph y equals 1/3 x plus 2. And our starting point is to start with the y-intercept. The y-intercept is 2. So there's my y-intercept, y equals 2. Now my slope is 1/3. Rise 1, run 3. Now I recommend that people do it over and over again. Rise 1, run 3. Rise 1, run 3. And you can even go in the other direction. I can rise -1 and run -3. That's the same thing. Rise -1, run -3. In other words, go down 1 and go to the left 3. And all these points should be in a straight line. And that is the graph of my line. Let's do this next one. Graph y equals 2x minus 3. Again, I don't see the slope in terms of a fraction, so I can make it a fraction by simply writing the slope with a denominator of 1. Y equals 2/1x. Well, that means I've got a slope of 2/1. But that's not where I start. I start with my y-intercept, which is -3. 1, 2, 3. So my y-intercept is -3. My slope is rise 2, run 1, rise 2, run 1, rise 2, run 1. And again, I can go in the negative direction. Rise -2. I could rise -2 and run -1. So rise -2, run -1, and it's still in the same line. That was kind of a bad line, but I think you get the idea. Let's do this next one. Graph y equals -1/2 x plus 5. Again, we start at our y-intercept of plus 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We plot our y-intercept. Now our slope is -1/2. So I rise -1 and then I run 2 spaces. Rise -1 and then run 2 spaces to the right. Rise -1, run 2 spaces to the right. And you could do it as many times as you want. Again, I could do the reverse of this, and this is kind of interesting. -1/2 is the same thing as 1/2. So that means I can rise 1, a positive 1, and I can run -2, which means 2 spaces to the left. I can rise 1 and then run -2. And all these points will be in a straight line. And I'm just sketching a line, so my line's not perfect. And let's do 2 more examples. Graph y equals x plus 1. Now you may say, well, this is strange. What's the slope? I don't see a slope. Well, there's an invisible number 1 here. And not only that, if you want to write it as a fraction, there's an invisible 1/1. So even though the function says y equals x plus 1, you could just imagine in your mind that the slope is actually 1 over 1. So I'm going to count my y-intercept, which is 1, and then my slope is rise 1, run 1, rise 1, run 1, rise 1, run 1. Or I could do rise -1, run -1. Down 1 to the left 1, down 1 to the left 1, down 1 to the left 1. And again, all these points should be in a perfectly straight line. And my last one, y equals 3x. And you may say, well, this is strange. What's the y-intercept? Well, if you had to add a y-intercept without changing anything, that would be the number 0. If you add 0 to something, you don't change the function. So y equals 3x plus 0 is the same function as y equals 3x, which means my y-intercept is 0. My y-intercept is at the origin. And the slope is 3, and you could imagine 3 over 1. So rise 1, 2, 3, run 1. Rise 1, 2, 3, run 1. Or you can go in the other direction. I can go rise -3, run -1. Rise 1, 2, 3 in the negative direction, run -1. And again, all these points should be in a straight line. And so that's my graph. So now let's have you try some. Now, pause the video. I will go over the answer in a few seconds. But pause the video and just take a sheet of graph paper. Notice I didn't have any axes. I'm going to have to draw the axes myself and graph these two equations. Or just graph one and then pause the video and we'll go over them one at a time. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is I want to draw my set of axes. And if I'm on graph paper, I want to try to be very careful. I'm drawing it actually on the grid lines. Now this is the x-axis, this is the y-axis, and let's switch colors. So my starting point is the y-intercept. I'm going to count -2. That's my y-intercept. And I'm going to count in increments of the slope, which is 1/5. Rise 1, run 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Rise 1, run 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I can go in the negative direction. I can rise -1 and I can run -5. -1 and then run -1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the key is all these points should appear in a perfectly straight line if you are doing the slope correctly. Now let's take a look at this next one. Again, you can pause the video if you'd like to try it on your own. Okay, let's go over it now. So again, I'm going to draw my axes, starting with a sheet of graph paper. Draw my axes. This is the x-axis. This is the y-axis. All right. Now, I start with plotting my y-intercept, which is +1. Now my slope is -3, or you could say -3 over 1, which means I am rising -3. 1, 2, 3. I'm in the downward direction, and I'm running 1. Rise -3, 1, 2, 3, and then run 1. Or I can go in the positive direction. -3 over 1 is the same as 3 over -1. So I could rise 3, 1, 2, 3, and then I can run -1. And again, all these points should be in a nice straight line. Okay? Hope this helps. Bye-bye.